it's from a strictly dollars and cents standpoint. Why not leave the money in Washington State to begin with, in lieu of sending it to Washington and actually getting back less than what you send, and getting mandates that determine how you should spend educational dollars in lieu of Washington State spending those dollars? I think most people think the Department of Education was established under George Washington, when it was established under Jimmy Carter.
Not to be confused with being a payback to the National Education Association for support of the 76 convention.
You said, I think, that you will submit a balanced budget in your first year, which...
First 100 days, that's
first
our
100
plan.
days,
Yeah.
even better.
Yeah.
Which, without any tax increases, would require something like a 15 to 20% cut in spending.
20%, yeah.
We haven't seen anything close to that since the end of World War II. What are you going to cut? How are you going to do that? Is it going to crash the economy when you do that?
No, I don't think. I think what will crash the economy is doing nothing. I don't think doing nothing is an option. And speaking specifically, Medicaid, Medicare. Look, for millennials, I'm going to get health care. I'm going to get retirement. But you're not. I mean, that's what this is all amounting to. It's amounting to reforming health care so that there is a safety net. It's about reforming Social Security so that there is retirement. But doing nothing will result in nothing, in my opinion.
So,
I'm sorry, but 15 to 20% of the federal budget, what are you going to cut?
Well, if you're not able to address the entitlements, Medicaid and Medicare, Social Security really isn't a cut as much as it is reform. If you're not going to cut the military by 20%, you're not going to be able to cut the rest of the federal government by 20%. But we would be looking at, and nothing is across the board. Across the board would say that nothing works. I have to believe there are things that do work. But I think that for the most part, there is that largesse that exists. And neither of us, we have been there and done that. We have been governors of our respective states, recognizing that there is that kind of largesse that exists.
the only thing that's required to cut 20% of the federal budget is the political will to do so. The money is sitting there. And if we, Gary's absolutely right. If you block granted Medicaid, send it back to the states, if you raise the retirement age for Social Security, if you impose the means test on Social Security, if you put a lot more competition into the healthcare system and mandated catastrophic coverage, but not credit grade across the board coverage for every health outcome that could conceivably happen, and let people contract with private providers on an advertised cost and advertised work to be done, neither of which we have now. The healthcare and the cost of the healthcare system would go down dramatically. The Pentagon itself has said that it has 20% too many bases. That came out of the last BRAC round, base realignment and closure. They've said that the Pentagon, including the Joint Chiefs of Staff, have said that, well, it's good that military pay and benefits has moved up over the last number of years. But right now we think maybe they're at a level that's even higher than they need to be to compete with the private sector. So what happens when they go to Congress with this? They get nowhere, because no member of Congress is going to sit still for any cut whatsoever in his or her district. So it would require an administration that had the political will to, as I say, I cut 14% of the budget my first month. I furloughed 14% of the workforce. It was 8,000 people out of 64,000. About 13 to 15% my first day in office. And I never got a postcard saying, where are those essential personnel? So government at all levels and layers in general, in my opinion, is 10 to 20% too big, probably closer to 20%. but it requires the process we were discussing earlier, zero basing the budget to ferret out the big dollar items. And it's not what people in Congress always say, we're going to ferret out waste, fraud, and abuse. It's not that. It's ill-conceived programs that shouldn't be there in the first place. And those are bigger dollars.
If we had any more military bases on Puget Sound out here, it would sink. Everything from torpedo testing to Triton nuclear submarines to Naval Air Station on the island where I live on weekends and so on. All of these bases have fervent defenders in our state's congressional delegation. How are you going to trim bases in the face of that kind of resistance?
Well, that's what's in place. That's what we're going up against. I would like to point out that
against it.
Huh?
How do you go up against
Well,
it?
Jim Corder did it. He was head of the last BRAC commission. He was a former New Jersey congressman and just a masterful politician, and he did it.
If you just had 2%, by the way, we're not getting elected king or dictator. We're looking to get elected president, vice president, constitutional limitations. We either get to accept what comes out of Congress or we get to say no to what comes out of Congress. But if you just had 2% growth in the federal government in real dollars, if you just had 2% growth coupled with historic economic growth, you would have a balanced budget in 5 years.
So, you know, on the previous base realignment and closure commission, my memory is that what Congress did was delegate to the commission authority to make recommendations which were then the subject of a single up or down vote, if that. Or maybe they took effect unless Congress said no. So you didn't have the individual congresswoman or congressman standing up and saying, yeah, I give up, you can close my base. The commission did the so-called dirty work, so to speak. And that's a tried and true mechanism.
I misheard earlier. Did you talk about block granting Medicaid or Medicare or both?
Block granting Medicaid and believing, having been governor of New Mexico, that if the federal government would have block granted me a fixed amount of money, that I would have had to draw new lines of eligibility and that I could have in fact had a safety net. No one would have gone without. But that would be the template for Medicaid. Medicare, I think the only way to reform Medicare is to devolve Medicare to the states, something that currently, of course, is the federal government. But I do believe the federal government incapable of coming up with a one-size-fits-all. In that kind of arrangement, I think you would have fabulous success that would get accomplished by individual states that would then get emulated by other states.
When you talk about drawing new lines of eligibility once you get the block grants, but then also in the next sentence say nobody's going to be left out, nobody's going to go without, that doesn't make sense to me. If you're changing the lines of eligibility, isn't that by definition leaving people out?
Well, if it means not having cell phones, perhaps that's.
No, but we're talking about Medicaid, right?
Well, that's welfare. That's cell phones. That's that's welfare. You're talking about welfare.
I was talking specifically about Medicaid.
Right, but I think under welfare, Medicaid, that is welfare. That's welfare. Medicaid is welfare.
I guess I don't understand. So when you say you're going to block grant Medicaid and say states you have to deal with this much money and they're going to redraw these lines of eligibility and the result is no more cell phones, like that's not adding up to me. I don't understand it.
Well, you're asking me what specifically I would do. I'm telling you there's a whole bunch of lines in there that I don't know if they belong, or that the eligibility be a higher level of income, the eligibility might be a copay. There's some things that can be done that, in my opinion, nobody's without, and yet you can still deliver those essential services. That's my opinion.
You could have sliding scale subsidies up to a multiple of the federal poverty rate, so that the top of that line would meet the bottom of the middle class. You could retain the disproportionate share adjustment for hospitals that gave an unusually large share of their services for uncompensated care. That's existing law. And that, you know, the dirty little secret is that not many people in this country go without medical attention. It may be delivered in the ER, and that cost may get socialized. And part of the aspiration of the Affordable Care Act, I think, was to get more people into the system. And this is a good part of that. Get 20 million more people into the system so that you do socialize. You do get the 28-year-old bartender who thinks he's immortal and he makes $105,000 a year. You get him into the system. And until he's in that system, he's never going to buy health insurance because of any kind, because he's immortal. And he's immortal until he breaks his leg skiing, and then he runs caterwauling into the ER, and you and I pay for that procedure.
But you guys would repeal Obamacare, no? Or am I wrong there?
Well, everybody says repeal. It's with us. It is with us.
Okay.
All right. So to come in and say I'm going to repeal Obamacare, I think that doesn't have a basis in reality.
Right. I mean, if we have a Republican Congress and you're the president,
and they want to repeal Obamacare, sure, I'll sign off on. But obviously, it's got to get replaced with something, and that something would be, in my opinion, would have to be a devolution of Medicaid to the states.
If we did the things that I was talking earlier about willing provider, willing acquirer, Gary's scenario for the world, and we also diminished the central role of government and insurance companies somewhat in favor of doctors and patients, so that you were pursuing twin goals of quality of care and cost cutting. Cost cutting is very important, but that's about the only thing that governments and insurance companies think about. Quality of care, that's doctors and patients. So I'd want to change the stakeholder powers so that doctors and patients have more there. There's, as Gary says, there's tons of lines here. Let people shop for insurance across state lines. Let people buy their pharmaceuticals in Canada. There's a lot of things you can do to introduce more competition into the system that we think would attack the cost side. And as a matter of politics and persuasion, I think neither of us is temperamentally inclined to ride into town saying, like a lot of 26-year-old congressmen, the first thing we're going to do is repeal Obamacare. These are people who have no idea what's in Obamacare. So if I ran the zoo, if we ran the zoo, we might say, here are 5 things, 6 things we'd like to try. Well, does that mean you're going to repeal Obamacare? We said, you tell us. These are just 3 or 4 or 5 things that we think might work. That's a more hospitable environment for getting some sort of effort at agreement than the current situation in Washington, which is the R's want to kill the D's want to kill the R's, the R presidential candidate wants to kill the D presidential candidate, and vice versa. That's just not very productive.
Other questions?
Governor Johnson, as we've discussed, your campaign, as you've said, hinges on making it onto the debate stage. You missed the cut for the first debate. What do you do between now and the second presidential debate? And I'll ask
Maybe we raise the volume a little bit on the Presidential Debate Commission and the fact that it's made up of Democrats and Republicans. Maybe we raise the volume on the fact that Ross Perot was polling lower than we are polling right now, and he was the last presidential candidate on stage. Maybe we raise the volume and that you might actually... Do you know that Ross Perot was polling lower than Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, and he was the last person allowed in the presidential debates?
And got about 20% of the vote.
And then ended up getting about 20% of the vote. We do believe that if we are in the presidential debates, that we do have an opportunity of winning, and we base that on having served as governors, and we base that on our philosophy: fiscally conservative, socially inclusive, skeptical of military interventions, regime change, favoring free trade. We think that that's reflective of most Americans.
But how first, to follow up on the question, how first do you get the American people interested in process? I know from reading the number of people that do hits on my stories that stories about campaign spending often bomb. Stories about debate process often bomb. How do you go against that and get this into public consciousness?
Well, that's our task. Is it not your task